Welcome to our study this week of Psalm chapter 91, verses 1 through 16. My name is Scott Rainey. I serve with the Church of the Nazarene in the area of Sunday School and Discipleship Ministries International, or SDMI. This adult Sunday School video lesson is provided in collaboration between the Foundry Publishing, formerly Nazarene Publishing House, and SDMI. The Sunday School lesson is intended to support the local church's efforts to make disciples who make disciples. Please feel free to use this video in any way that helps your church and families. Today's lesson will help us have a proper response to the feelings of vulnerability and fear. Two explorers were on a jungle safari when suddenly a ferocious lion jumped in front of them. "Keep calm," the first explorer whispered. "Remember what we learned in that book on wild animals? If you stand perfectly still and look the lion in the eye, he will turn and run." "Sure," replied his companion. "You've read the book and I've read the book, but has the lion read the book?" I heard about a mother and child one summer night during a severe thunderstorm. A mother was tucking her small son into bed. She was about to turn the light off when he asked in a trembling voice, "Mommy, will you stay with me all night?" Smiling, the mother gave him a warm, reassuring hug and said tenderly, "I can't, dear. I have to sleep in Daddy's room." A long silence followed. At last it was broken by the shaky young voice saying, "That big sissy." And finally, during World War II, a military governor met with General George Patton in Sicily. When he praised Patton highly for his courage and bravery, the general replied, "Sir, I'm not a brave man. The truth is, I'm an utter craven coward. I have never been within the sound of gunshot or in the sight of battle in my whole life that I wasn't so scared that I had sweat in the palms of my hands." Years later, when Patton's autobiography was published, it contained this significant statement by the general. He said, quote, "I've learned very early in my life never to take counsel of my fears." Any nervous parent will tell you the world is a dangerous place. Imagine living in a culture without safety nets like health insurance, bankruptcy provisions, or the rule of law. Imagine danger lurking around every corner and disaster only one bad harvest away. The feeling of vulnerability would be an unwelcome but constant companion. This is the reality for many in the world today, and was certainly the reality in the ancient Near East. Sin had entered the world through Adam and Eve. This sin created very real dangers and also great fears. In the fallen state of the world, God created institutions like family, law, and government to find a measure of protection, and when disaster strikes, a path to recovery. Unfortunately, these institutions often fell short in providing support. Death in a family left a widow and possibly orphans. Laws went unenforced because of corruption and greed. Rather than protecting people from violence, some kings perpetrated it. Vulnerability was unavoidable and at times abundant. Psalm chapter 91 speaks to such vulnerability and fears. Let's read together Psalm chapter 91, verses 1 through 16. "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. If you say, the Lord is my refuge, and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. Our commentator refers to Psalm chapter 91, verses 1 and 2 as an affirmation of trust. General George Patton learned early in life to never take counsel from his fears. So where do you and I go in the midst of fear? In the first two verses of Psalm chapter 91, the psalmist skillfully points to God 4 times in the midst of fear. First, notice the 4 names the psalmist uses for God. He calls him the Most High and the Almighty. These first 2 names for God speak of God's immensity and his power. The third name used for God is the Lord, that is Yahweh in Hebrew, God's covenant name, the name in which God made himself known to the Israelite people. And finally, my God, the 4th name, showing that God is a personal God, a relational God. He is my God. Next, notice that these 2 verses give 4 different terms to describe God's protection. First, a shelter. This generally refers to a temporary hiding place one discovers in times of need. Second, a shadow, a place of rest and comfort. Third, a refuge, a place of safety, usually when someone is on the run. And last, a fortress, a physical structure constructed to defend. And finally, in these 2 short verses, we see 4 significant verbs. First, to dwell. It implies living somewhere permanently. Second, to rest, which implies a temporary stay, maybe resting there for only one night. Third, to say, reflecting on the psalmist's testimony. And then last, to trust, living out that testimony by faith. What began in verse 1 as a general statement, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High, ends in verse 2 with the psalmist declaring a personal testimony, I trust. If verses 1 and 2 are an affirmation of trust, Psalm 91 verses 3 through 13 give the reason for trust. The language of verses 1 and 2 shift from I to you as we begin in verse 3. These verses come as exhortation. It's not just for me to trust God. I want to encourage you to trust God also. Why? Because God saves and he protects, verses 3 and 4. Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. The fowler's snare is an animal trap. He will save you from that. The deadly pestilence is disease. These represent all kinds of things that could entrap or threaten a person or people. The source could be natural causes or human enemies. Either way, the result is destruction. In verse 4, we find that God is one of the flock. He will cover you with his feathers, it says, and under his wings you will find refuge. Like Jesus, who came to earth in the flesh, God here is described as the same species as the one needing protection. Like a mighty bird, he provides protection with his feathers and his wings. The Hebrew mind would associate this with the wings of the cherubim in the temple, where the protection was primarily in the form of God's faithful presence. The metaphor changes in verse 4 from birds to soldiers and from wings to shields. God's protection is found in his faithfulness. He can be trusted completely. The shield mentioned here is like a large shield that could even cover the entire body. A rampart refers to a portable wall set up in front of soldiers during the heat of battle. The key is this: whether in the nest or the battlefield, we can count on God's protection. For you and me today, whether we are in our bed at night or even in a hospital bed, or whether we are under attack by the world or even possibly by religious people for our trust in God, God's protection is real because he's faithful. Verses 5 and 6 reveal when and how these attacks may come. When? It says by day or night, in darkness or in midday. How will they come? From human forces like arrows, from fatal illness like pestilence or plague, or even from evil supernatural forces, it says like terror in the night. The point is that these attacks can happen at any point in life, day or night, and can either be physical or spiritual. One of these reasons the attacks cause us so much fear is that many people fall around us. Verse 7 uses a poetic literary device known as intensification. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand. Even though all these fall, that does not mean that we're destined for the same fate. Followers of God, in the end, will not even need to defend themselves, but will watch as God defeats their enemies. Now, it's possible to take verses 9 through 13 as a promise that God will protect his people from all harm and all disaster always. It's kind of a prosperity teaching. If you will follow God, the thought is, only good things will come your way. God's word does not teach this. In John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." The apostles experienced floggings and beatings and even death. Jesus, our master, went to the cross, a place of great suffering and death. It's interesting that Satan tried to twist these very words when he tempted Jesus in John chapter 4. John chapter 4, verses 9 through 11 says, "The devil led him," referring to Jesus, "to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. 'If you are the Son of God,' he said, 'throw yourself down from here, for it is written,'" and Satan quotes Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12. "He will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." And in verse 12, Jesus rightly answered, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." What is important is our relationship with God. Where he is, there is safety from evil and the promise of ultimate freedom. Verse 13 adds one final threat against God's people, the threat of animals. We already have encountered human forces, illness, and evil supernatural forces. Now is added the lion and the cobra. This final image goes beyond the theme of protection and safety, a defensive posture, and addresses the possibility of being the aggressor. God's people will trample on the lion and the cobra. The lion and the cobra would normally engage a human with a surprise attack from places of hiding. What looked like sure defeat ended up in victory. When you add this all up, we learn that God created humankind for faith. I love the way Dr. E. Stanley Jones said it. He said, "I am inwardly fashioned for faith, not for fear. Faith is not my native land. Fear is not my native land. Faith is. I am so made that worry and anxiety are sand in the machinery of life. Faith is the oil. I live better by faith and confidence than by fear, doubt, and anxiety. In anxiety and worry, my being is gasping for breath. These are not my native air. But in faith and confidence, I breathe freely. These are my native air." A Johns Hopkins University doctor says, "We do not know why it is that worriers die sooner than the non-worriers, but that is a fact." Dr. E. Stanley Jones went on and said, "But I, who am simple of mind, think I know. We are inwardly constructed in nerve and tissue, brain cell and soul for faith, not for fear. God made us that way. To live by worry is to live against reality." The final three verses of Psalm 91, verses 14 to 16, give a divine response. What a great way to end this psalm of trust, allowing God to be the speaker. Who received the benefits of God's protective faithfulness? According to verse 14, the one who loves God and acknowledges his name. This is significant because it does not point to human accomplishments. Rather, loving God and acknowledging him points to a relationship with God based on intimate, affectionate devotion. Just as God was all in with God's whole being, so too we must respond with complete love and acknowledgement, putting our trust fully in God. I want to conclude this lesson as the psalmist did this psalm with the words of God. Hear them written for you today. These are the words of God. Because you love me, I will rescue you. I will protect you, for you acknowledge my name. You will call on me, and I will answer you. I will be with you in trouble. I will deliver you and honor you. With long life, I will satisfy you and show you my salvation.